My name is Catherine Sterling. I am 52 years old and I have spent my entire adult life ensuring that the Sterling family legacy didn't just survive, but dominated. 3 days ago, my parents were lowered into the earth in a ceremony that cost more than most people earn in a decade. It was tasteful, expensive, and utterly exhausting. But nothing, not the endless line of condolences, not the heavy scent of lilies that seemed to cling to my pores, could have prepared me for the sound of my own front door key scraping uselessly against the tumblers of the lock. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the day of the funeral. The sun was high and unforgiving, casting harsh shadows against the limestone facade of Highgrove Estate. The house sat on 4 acres of prime Connecticut coastline, a sprawling monument to my father's ambition and my mother's taste. I had grown up here. For the last 6 months, I had practically lived here, sleeping in the guest suite, so I could be close enough to administer morphine at 3 a.m. and manage the night nurses. I stood on the porch, my black heels sinking slightly into the pristine welcome mat. I tried the key again. Jiggle, push, turn. Nothing. It was a heavy brass key, one I had carried on my ring since I was 16. It felt like a betrayal in my hand. "It won't work, Catherine." The voice floated out from the drawing room window to my left. I stepped back, shielding my eyes against the glare of the afternoon sun. The window was open a crack, just enough to let the sea breeze in. Beatrice was standing there, my younger sister. She was wearing a silk robe that I recognized as mother's, and she held a crystal flute of what looked like the vintage Dom Perignon father had been saving for his golden anniversary. "Beatrice," I called out, my voice raspy from days of holding back tears. "What's going on? The lock is jammed. Open the door." Beatrice took a slow sip of the champagne, her eyes watching me with a glassy, detached amusement. She looked rested. Of course she was rested. She had spent the last week at a spa in Sedona, processing her grief, while I planned the funeral, filed the death certificates, and hosted the wake. "The lock isn't jammed, Kate," she said, using the nickname I hated. "It's changed. I had the locksmith out this morning while you were at the cemetery overseeing the final touches." My grip tightened on my handbag. "You changed the locks today." Beatrice opened the door. "My clothes are in there. My laptop. The files for the estate." "No," she said simply. She swirled the champagne in the glass. "You see, I've been doing some thinking, and I realized that for the last, 30 years, you've just sort of taken over everything, haven't you? You ran Daddy's company. You managed Mommy's doctors. You acted like you owned the place. Well, now they're gone, and I'm the one currently inside the house. Possession is 9/10 of the law, isn't that what Daddy always said?" "That is not how the law works, Beatrice," I said, trying to keep the rising panic out of my voice. "This is my residence. I have established tenancy. You cannot just lock me out." "I think you'll find I can." She smiled, a sharp, brittle expression. "I have the security codes, Kate. I have the keys. And I have spoken to the staff. They answer to me now. If you try to force your way in, I'll call the police and have you removed for trespassing." Imagine the optics of that. The CEO of Sterling Logistics arrested for breaking and entering her dead parents' home. The board would love that. I stood frozen. The threat was ridiculous, yet entirely plausible. Beatrice was volatile, dramatic, and possessed a terrifying lack of shame. If I called the police, it would become a spectacle. The tabloids would descend. The stock price would wobble. She knew exactly which lever to pull to make me back down. "You're drunk," I said, my voice cold. "I'm celebrating," she corrected. "Or mourning. It's a fine line. Go stay at a hotel, Kate. You can afford it. We'll see you at the will reading on Friday. Thaddeus said everyone needs to be there. Beatrice, my medication is in there. My suit for the meeting." "Buy new ones," she said, and then she reached out and pulled the window shut. I watched the latch turn from the inside. I stood there for a long time, the sun beating down on my black funeral dress. I looked at the heavy oak doors, the doors I had walked through 1,000 times. I looked at the manicure I had gotten just for the funeral, now clenching my car keys so hard my knuckles were white. The silence of the estate was deafening. There were no gardeners working today out of respect, no cars in the driveway, just me, the heiress to an empire locked out like a common solicitor. I turned around, walked back to my Mercedes, and sat in the driver's seat. My hands were shaking, not from grief and not from fear. I was shaking from a rage so pure and white-hot that it felt like it might burn the leather steering wheel. I started the engine, the low purr of the German engineering offering the only comfort I had left. I didn't look back at the house as I drove away. I knew Beatrice was watching from behind the curtains, drinking father's champagne, believing she had finally won. I checked into the St. Regis downtown, opting for a suite that offered a view of the harbor, specifically the docks where Sterling Logistics containers were stacked like colorful toy bricks. I needed to see them. I needed to be reminded that while Beatrice might hold the keys to a house, I held the keys to the engine that paid for it, or at least I thought I did. I poured myself a glass of water from the minibar and sat by the window, watching the cranes move in the distance. The silence of the hotel room was sterile, a sharp contrast to the chaotic medicalized atmosphere of Highgrove over the past few months. It's difficult to explain the dynamic between Beatrice and me to anyone who didn't grow up inside the peculiar pressure cooker of American wealth. We are separated by 4 years in age and light years in temperament. I was the firstborn, the one who inherited father's square jaw and his inability to relax. Beatrice was the baby, the one who got mother's delicate features and her talent for manipulation. From the time I was 22, freshly graduated from Wharton, I was in the office. I started in operations tracking shipping manifests, learning the difference between a Panamax and a Suezmax vessel. I worked 80-hour weeks. I missed birthdays, I missed weddings. I never married because, quite frankly, I never found a man who demanded less of my time than Sterling Logistics. I became CEO 7 years ago, and in that time, I tripled our market cap. I steered us through the trade wars and the supply chain crises. I kept the dividends flowing so that my parents could winter in Gstaad and Beatrice could pretend to be an art consultant in Milan or a fashion designer in New York or whatever identity she was trying on that season. Beatrice, the sunshine child. While I was negotiating union contracts, Beatrice was finding herself in Bali. While I was firing incompetent VPs, Beatrice was getting her third DUI expunged from the record by expensive family lawyers. But the real divide, the one that had led to the lock changing, happened in the last year. When mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, it was swift and brutal. Father, whose heart had been failing for years, simply gave up the ghost 3 weeks after her diagnosis, dying of what the doctors called cardiac arrest, but what I knew was sheer terror at the prospect of living without her. I moved into Highgrove. I set up a command center in the library. I ran a global shipping empire from a laptop while listening to the hiss of oxygen tanks. I changed sheets. I learned how to crush pills into applesauce when mother couldn't swallow. I held the basin while she was sick. I sat with father while he wept, confused and frail, stripping away the titan of industry I had known to reveal a scared old man. And Beatrice visited twice. The first time she stayed for 20 minutes, told mother she looked so brave, and then left because the smell of the antiseptic was triggering her migraines. The second time was to ask father for an advance on her trust fund because she wanted to invest in a friend's kombucha startup. She didn't see the indignity of dying. She didn't see the fear. She waited until they were gone, until the hard work was finished, and then she swooped in. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window of the hotel suite. I looked tired. The lines around my eyes were deeper than I remembered. I had given everything to my parents. I had been the dutiful daughter, the competent executive, the nurse, the steward. I had sacrificed my own life to ensure theirs ended with dignity. And their final act, it seemed, was to leave me vulnerable to the one person who had never sacrificed anything. I thought about the will reading on Friday. Thaddeus Cromwell, our family attorney for 40 years, was a man of the old school, tight-lipped, formal, and utterly unreadable. He had been there at the funeral, shaking my hand firmly, his eyes dark behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He hadn't said a word about the locks or the house. He simply said, "Friday, Catherine, 10 a.m. Bring your identification." Why identification? He had known me since I was in pigtails. A horrible thought began to take root in my chest. Beatrice was confident. Too confident. She wasn't just acting out. She was acting with the assurance of someone who knows the end of the movie. Had they done it? Had my parents in their final drug-addled months been swayed by Beatrice's tears and performative affection? Had she whispered in their ears while I was on conference calls? I had seen it happen in other families. The prodigal son narrative. The parents facing mortality forgive the screw-up child and resent the competent one. The competent one reminds them of their aging, of the business, of the reality. The screw-up reminds them of their youth, their hopes. Beatrice was charm and light. I was spreadsheets and morphine schedules. If they had left it all to her, the company, the control, the legacy, I didn't know what I would do. It wasn't about the money. I had my own portfolio substantial enough to retire comfortably. It was the erasure. It was the idea that 30 years of loyalty amounted to less than 30 years of being adorable. I went to the desk and pulled out a piece of hotel stationery. I began to make a list of assets, a list of potential legal strategies. I worked until the sun went down and the city lights came up, turning the view into a glittering grid of commerce. I was Catherine Sterling. I solved problems for a living. I would not let my sister steal my life without a war. The next morning, I decided to bypass the emotional quagmire of the house and go straight to the one place where I still had absolute authority, the headquarters of Sterling Logistics. I needed to access the safe in my office where I kept copies of the family trust documents. If Beatrice was playing dirty, I needed to know exactly where the leverage points were before Friday. I dressed in the clothes I had worn to the hotel, a simple black blouse and slacks, and took a cab to the financial district. The headquarters was a 40-story glass needle piercing the sky, a building I had helped design. I walked into the lobby, the familiar click of my heels on the marble, usually signaling a flurry of activity from the reception staff. "Good morning, Ms. Sterling," the security guard Miller said. He was a good man, retired NYPD. He usually had a smile for me. Today he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Morning, Miller," I said, reaching for my security pass to tap against the turnstile. The light flashed red. Access denied. I frowned and tapped it again. Red. "Miller, there seems to be a glitch with my card. Can you buzz me through?" Miller stepped out from behind the podium. He looked miserable. He adjusted his belt, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I can't do that, Ms. Sterling." "Excuse me." I lowered my sunglasses. "What do you mean you can't? I'm the CEO." "I know, ma'am, I know. But we got a call late last night, from the legal department, and from your sister. They said there's a freeze on all executive access pending the reading of the will." "My sister does not work here, Miller. She has no authority to freeze my access." "They sent over a document, ma'am. Temporary restraining order on company assets. It was signed by a judge. It says until the probate is settled, no family members are allowed access to sensitive data or the physical offices to prevent tampering." My blood ran cold. "Tampering?" Beatrice had accused me of tampering Miller, I said, keeping my voice level, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Call the legal department. Get Thaddeus on the phone." "Mr. Cromwell is listed as the executor, ma'am. His office sent the memo." "I'm sorry, truly. But if I let you up, I lose my pension." I looked at this man, a man I had authorized a Christmas bonus for 5 years running. He was terrified, not of me, but of the machinery of law that had suddenly turned against me. Beatrice had been busy. She hadn't just changed the locks on the house. She had launched a preemptive strike on my career. She was painting a narrative that I was a threat to the estate. I realized then that I had underestimated her. Or rather, I had underestimated the people she had hired. Beatrice wasn't smart enough to think of a restraining order on company assets. Someone was advising her. Someone who knew exactly how to cripple me. "I understand," I said quietly. "Thank you, Miller." I turned and walked out of the building. I didn't storm. I didn't make a scene. I walked out into the blinding daylight feeling utterly naked. I was the CEO, yet I was locked out of my building. I was the daughter, yet I was locked out of my home. In the span of 24 hours, my identity had been stripped away, layer by layer. I returned to the hotel suite and sat on the edge of the bed. My phone blinked. A voicemail. I dialed in. It was Thaddeus. "Catherine?" His voice was like gravel grinding together. "I trust you received the message regarding the office. It is a standard procedure when there is a dispute regarding the estate's distribution. Do not attempt to circumvent security. It will only weaken your position. Come to the reading on Friday. Bring nothing but your identification. And Catherine, prepare yourself. The will is specific." The line went dead. Specific. That was a lawyer's word for devastating. I spent the next 2 days in a fugue state of anxiety and planning. I couldn't access my files, so I worked from memory. I wrote down everything I knew about the company bylaws, the shareholder agreements, the trust structures. I tried to find a loophole, a way to claw back control if the worst happened. But the truth was, if my parents had left the controlling shares to Beatrice, or if they had set up a board structure that ousted me, there was very little I could do. The company was private. The will was law. I ordered room service but didn't eat. I watched the sun rise and set over the harbor. I felt a strange, hollow grief, not just for my parents, but for the life I thought I had earned. I realized that for decades I had been running a race where the finish line kept moving. I thought the prize was respect, security, love. But it seemed the prize was just a view of the shipping containers from a hotel room I was paying for with my own credit card. By Thursday night, the anger had cooled into something harder, something like steel. I stopped trying to figure out how to save the company. I stopped worrying about the legacy. I focused on one thing: survival. If Beatrice wanted a fight, she would get one. But I wouldn't fight like her with tantrums and locks. I would fight like a CEO. I would wait for the day to analyze the liabilities, and then I would execute. I went to sleep early. I needed to be rested. Tomorrow was Judgment Day. Friday morning dawned cold, bright, and sharp. The sky was a piercing blue, the kind that makes your eyes water. It was a money day, as my father used to call them, days when the air felt crisp enough to count currency. I rose at 6 a.m. I showered, scrubbing my skin until it was pink, washing away the last lingering scent of the funeral lilies and the hotel soap. Then I began the process of armoring myself. I didn't choose black. Black was for mourning, and mourning implied weakness. I chose navy blue. A structured Armani suit with a razor-sharp lapel and a skirt that hit exactly at the knee. It was a power suit, the kind I wore to negotiate acquisitions of rival fleets. I paired it with a cream silk blouse and pearl studs, understated, classic, unimpeachable. I pulled my hair back into a tight chignon. No loose strands, no chaos. I applied my makeup with surgical precision, a bold red lip, not too bright, but dark enough to signal danger. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the tired, grieving daughter who had been locked out of her home. I saw Catherine Sterling, CEO. I saw a woman who could stare down a union boss without blinking. I grabbed my purse, checking for the third time that I had my driver's license and passport. "Bring nothing but your identification." Thaddeus's words echoed in my head. It was an odd request. Usually one brought council files, notaries. Just ID. It felt like a tribunal. I took a town car to the law offices of Cromwell, Finch and Sterling. Yes, Sterling. My grandfather had been a founding partner before he pivoted to shipping. The firm occupied the top 3 floors of a pre-war building on the Upper East Side, a place where the elevators smelled of mahogany and old money. During the ride, I forced myself to visualize the worst-case scenario. Beatrice gets the company. Beatrice gets the house. I am terminated as CEO. I am given a token cash settlement and sent on my way. I played the tape forward. What would I do? I had 8 figures in my personal accounts. I could move to London. I could start a consulting firm. I could finally take a vacation. The thought was terrifying. I didn't know how to exist without the company. It was my child, my spouse, my hobby, my life. But as we pulled up to the curb, a strange calm settled over me. My parents were gone. Their judgment was sealed in a leather binder upstairs. No amount of worrying would change the ink on the page. All I could control was how I took the blow. Beatrice wanted me to cry. She wanted me to scream. She wanted the drama she accused me of causing. I would give her nothing. I would be an ice sculpture. I stepped out of the car, thanking the driver. I adjusted my jacket. I looked up at the stone gargoyles perched on the building's ledge. "Okay, Mother. Okay, Father," I whispered to the cold city air. "Let's see what you really thought of me." I walked through the revolving doors, my heels clicking a steady rhythmic beat on the terrazzo floor. I checked in at the security desk, handed over my ID, and received a visitor's badge. Visitor. That stung. I had been coming here for 30 years as a client. The elevator ride was silent. I watched the floor numbers tick up. 30, 31, 32. When the doors opened, the reception area was hushed. The receptionist, a young woman who looked like she was afraid to breathe too loudly, looked up. "Ms. Sterling," she whispered, "they are waiting for you in the boardroom." "Thank you," I said. My voice was steady. I walked down the long corridor lined with oil portraits of dead partners. I felt their eyes on me. I reached the double mahogany doors at the end of the hall. I paused for 1 second, taking a deep breath, expanding my diaphragm, centering my weight. Then I pushed the doors open and walked into the snake pit. The conference room was vast, dominated by a table long enough to land a small plane on. The walls were lined with leather-bound law books that no one had opened since the Reagan administration. The view overlooking Central Park was spectacular, costing roughly $1,000 a billable hour to enjoy. Beatrice was already there, of course. She sat on the right side of the table, the side traditionally reserved for the victors in my experience of corporate settlements. She was wearing a white dress. White. As if she were a bride or a virgin sacrifice. It was a Chanel tweed undoubtedly purchased with the emergency credit card I had authorized for medical expenses last month. Next to her sat Preston, her third husband. Preston was a brand ambassador for a luxury watch company, which mostly meant he wore expensive watches he didn't pay for and posted photos of his wrists on Instagram. He looked bored scrolling through his phone, his tanned ankles visible beneath his loafer-cut trousers. And behind Beatrice sat a woman I didn't recognize, a severe-looking personal assistant with an iPad ready to take notes on her mistress's triumph. "You're late," Beatrice said, checking her wrist, though there was no watch there. "It is 10 o'clock a.m. exactly," I said, checking my Patek Philippe. "You're early. Eager, I suppose." I pulled out the chair on the opposite side of the table, the defendant's side. I sat down, placing my clutch on the table. I didn't look at Preston. I locked eyes with my sister. "I hope you're comfortable at the hotel," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "The St. Regis is nice, isn't it? Though the decor is a bit dated." "It's fine, Beatrice. Thank you for asking." "I've already started looking at decorators for Highgrove," she continued, unable to help herself. "I'm thinking of gutting the library. It's so dark. Daddy loved it, but it feels like a mausoleum. I want to turn it into a wellness studio, yoga meditation, light therapy." My stomach clenched. The library was where Father and I had planned the Asian expansion. It was where I had sat with him while he died. "The library is historic," I said. "The paneling is 19th century English oak. It's wood, Kate. It's just old wood. You're so sentimental." She laughed, looking at Preston for validation. He gave a grunt of agreement without looking up from his phone. The side door opened, and Thaddeus Cromwell entered. The room temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. Thaddeus was 80 years old, stooped, and moved with the slow, deliberate shuffles of a giant tortoise. He carried a single thick manila envelope. He didn't look at Beatrice. He didn't look at me. He walked to the head of the table, sat down, and placed the envelope in the center. He took a pair of reading glasses from his breast pocket and cleaned them slowly with a handkerchief. The silence stretched until it was agonizing. Beatrice stopped smiling. Preston put his phone away. "Good morning," Thaddeus said, his voice dry as parchment. "Morning, Thaddeus?" Beatrice chirped. "Let's get started, shall we? We have a lunch reservation at Le Bernardin at 1. Thaddeus looked at her over the rim of his glasses. It was a withering look. "This is a legal proceeding, Beatrice. Not a pre-theater cocktail hour. Show some respect." Beatrice flushed pink. "I just meant—" "I know what you meant." He opened the envelope. He pulled out a document bound in blue paper. "I am here to read the last will and testament of Arthur and Eleanor Sterling. I served as witness to these signatures 6 months ago. The contents are legally binding and incontestable." He paused, looking at me for the first time. His eyes were sad. "Are we ready?" he asked. "Yes," Beatrice said, leaning forward, her eyes hungry. "Yes," I said, leaning back, bracing myself. "Very well." Thaddeus cleared his throat. "We shall begin with the personal property and real estate assets." Thaddeus began to read. The legal language was dense, full of herebys and bequeaths, but the meaning was crystal clear. "To my daughter, Beatrice Sterling Davis." Thaddeus read, "We leave the property known as Highgrove Estate, located in Greenwich, Connecticut, including all contents, furniture, and art, excluding items specifically listed in the codicil." Beatrice let out a squeal, clapping her hands together. "Yes, I knew it. The wellness studio is happening." I felt a physical blow to my chest, but I kept my face impassive. Highgrove was gone. My childhood home. Gone. Furthermore, Thaddeus continued, raising his voice slightly to cut over Beatrice's celebration. "We leave the vacation property located in East Hampton, New York, and the flat in Paris, France, to Beatrice Sterling Davis." Beatrice grabbed Preston's arm. "The Hampton house, too. Oh my God, Preston, we can finally host the white party this summer." Thaddeus continued. "We also bequeath the entirety of the vintage automobile collection currently housed at the Highgrove Garage to Beatrice Sterling Davis. Father's cars, his 1965 Jaguar E-Type, his vintage Porsche. He had taught me to drive stick shift in that Porsche. He had promised it to me when I graduated college, then said he wasn't ready to part with it. Now it belonged to a woman who didn't know how to check her own oil. And finally," Thaddeus said, turning a page, "all personal jewelry, furs, and loose gemstones belonging to Eleanor Sterling are left to Beatrice Sterling Davis." Beatrice looked at me, her eyes shining with malice and triumph. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. She slid it across the table toward me. "Here," she said. "I brought this for you. I knew Mom would want you to have something. It's that little pearl brooch she wore to church. It's cute. Fits your style. A bit plain." I looked at the box. I didn't touch it. It was a pity gift, a crumb from the feast. "Thank you, Beatrice," I said. My voice sounded hollow to my own ears. "Is that it for the stuff?" Beatrice asked Thaddeus. "Can we get to the money, the stocks?" "That concludes the distribution of physical personal property and real estate," Thaddeus said. He closed the folder he was reading from and set it aside. He picked up a second document, this one thinner. I sat there processing the magnitude of the loss. They had given her everything. The houses, the cars, the rings. Every tangible memory of my parents was now legally hers. It was a rejection so total it felt like they were killing me from the grave. They chose the fun daughter, the pretty daughter. They chose the one who would sell the Jaguar to buy a handbag. I looked at the view of Central Park. I tried to focus on a tree, a cloud, anything to keep the tears from spilling over. "Don't cry," I told myself. "Do not give her the satisfaction." "Well," Beatrice prompted. "The accounts the company shares. Come on, Thaddeus. I assume it's a 50-50 split or maybe 60-40 since I have the houses to maintain." Thaddeus took a sip of water. He looked at Beatrice, then at Preston, then finally settled his gaze on me. There was a glimmer in his eye now, something sharp, something dangerous. "We now move to the disposition of the family enterprise and liquid assets," Thaddeus said. "This section governs Sterling Logistics, the family investment portfolio, and the cash trusts." He adjusted his glasses. Clause 4, Section A, regarding the controlling interest in Sterling Logistics. My parents, Arthur and Eleanor Sterling, being of sound mind, recognize that the stewardship of a multi-billion-dollar corporation requires a specific temperament and skill set. Beatrice rolled her eyes. "Yada yada, skip the lecture." To my daughter, Beatrice, Thaddeus read, "We leave a fixed stipend of $150,000 per annum to be paid in monthly installments adjusted for inflation." Beatrice froze. "Excuse me, $150,000. That's a joke, right? That doesn't even cover the property tax on Highgrove." Thaddeus ignored her. To my daughter, Catherine Sterling. My head snapped up. "We leave 100% of the voting shares of Sterling Logistics, making her the sole owner and chairperson. Furthermore, we leave the entirety of the Sterling Family Trust, which holds the liquid capital, the investment portfolios, and the operating accounts, to Catherine Sterling, to be managed at her sole discretion as trustee." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than the silence at the grave. "I don't understand," Beatrice said, her voice trembling. "What does that mean, sole discretion?" Thaddeus looked at me. "It means, Beatrice, that your parents left the houses and the cars to you. They are your property. However, they left the money, the actual wealth that generated those assets, to Catherine." But the houses," Beatrice stammered. "Highgrove costs $500,000 a year to run the landscaping, the heating, the insurance. How am I supposed to pay for that with a $150,000 allowance?" "That, yeah," Thaddeus said calmly, "is a problem for the property owner." "This is insane," Preston shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "You can't leave someone a mansion and no money to run it. That's setting them up to fail." "Precisely," Thaddeus said. He turned to me. "Catherine, the trust is structured such that you have absolute control over distributions. You are under no obligation to fund the maintenance of Beatrice's properties. Your parents were very specific in their notes. They felt that Beatrice enjoys the trappings of wealth, but Catherine understands the burden of it. They wanted Beatrice to have the shiny objects she always coveted. They wanted Catherine to have the power." I sat back in my chair, the breath returning to my lungs in a rush. I looked at the documents, the enterprise clause. It wasn't just a bequest, it was a test, or perhaps a lesson. My parents knew Beatrice. They knew she would never work a day in her life. If they gave her the money, she would burn through it in 5 years and lose the company. By giving her the things, but giving me the means, they had inverted the power dynamic completely. "You tricked me!" Beatrice screamed, turning on me. "You knew about this! That's why you were so calm." "I knew nothing," I said, my voice gathering strength. "I was locked out of my house. Remember, I was locked out of my office." "The will states," Thaddeus interrupted, "that the trust also holds the mortgages. Yes, Beatrice Highgrove is not paid off. Your father leveraged it 5 years ago to expand the Asian fleet. The mortgage payments are $40,000 a month. The trust holds the note. If the payments are not made—" He looked at me. "The trust can foreclose on the property," I finished. Beatrice's face went pale white. You would foreclose on me." I looked at my sister, the woman who had changed the locks while I was burying our parents, the woman who had threatened to have me arrested, the woman who had handed me a brooch as a consolation prize for my entire life. "I have a fiduciary duty to the trust, Beatrice," I said, using the voice I used for underperforming regional managers. "I cannot allow trust assets to be wasted on non-performing investments. If the resident of the property cannot meet the financial obligations, the trust must act to protect its principal." "I'm your sister," she wailed. Tears were streaming down her face, now ruining her makeup. "You can't do this. Mom and Dad wouldn't want this." Mom and Dad wrote this, I said coldly. Thaddeus, am I correct in assuming that the freeze on my access to the company is now lifted? Effective immediately, Thaddeus said. You are the owner, Catherine. You can fire anyone you like, including the security team that blocked you. I stood up. I picked up my clutch. I didn't touch the velvet box with the brooch. Where are you going? Beatrice gasped. We have to fix this. Kate, you have to write me a check. I can't pay the staff. The pool guys are coming on Tuesday. I have to go to work, I said. I have a company to run. And Beatrice. She looked up, eyes wide with panic. Don't change the locks on the Hamptons house. I might want to visit. And since I hold the mortgage, I'd hate to have to call the police on a squatter. I walked out of the conference room and didn't look back. I heard Preston shouting at Thaddeus, demanding to see the papers, but the sounds faded as the heavy mahogany doors swung shut. I took the elevator down to the lobby. When I stepped out onto the street, the air tasted different. It didn't taste like grief anymore. It tasted like ozone and gasoline and victory. I went straight to the office. When I walked into the lobby of Sterling Logistics Miller, the guard saw me coming. He stood up so fast his chair knocked against the wall. Ms. Sterling? He stammered. I heard. Legal called down just now. It's fine, Miller, I said, breezing past the turnstile as the light turned green. You were doing your job. But Miller… Yes, ma'am. Delete my sister's name from the visitor log, permanently. If she shows up, she is to be treated as any other member of the public. She waits in the lobby until someone me decides to see her. Understood, Ms. Sterling. I went up to the 40th floor. My assistant Sarah was at her desk looking anxious. When she saw me, she burst into tears. Oh, Catherine, thank God. Beatrice was here yesterday. She was measuring the office for drapes. She said she was going to fire me because I didn't have the right energy. You're safe, Sarah, I said, walking into my office. Get me the CFO on the line, and get me a list of all outstanding liabilities on the Highgrove and Hampton properties. The next few hours were a blur of forensic accounting. It was worse than Thaddeus had intimated. Highgrove was a money pit. The maintenance costs alone were astronomical. My parents had afforded it because the company paid for corporate retreats. They're absorbing much of the cost. But with Beatrice as the owner, those tax loopholes closed. She was personally liable for everything. The $150,000 stipend wouldn't even cover the property taxes. By 3:00 p.m., my phone began to ring. It was Beatrice. I let it go to voicemail, then Preston. Voicemail. Then a text from Beatrice. Kate, please. The staff is asking for their checks. Dad always paid them on the 1st. I don't have the money. I looked at the text. I felt a twinge of guilt, the old reflex, the one trained into me by decades of being the fixer. Just write the check, a voice in my head said. It's easier. Keep the peace. But then I remembered the lock. I remembered the feeling of the key refusing to turn. I remembered her drinking champagne while I stood on the porch. I typed a reply. The trust is reviewing all external expenditures. Submit a formal request in writing for any funds. Note that personal staff for non-company assets are not covered. I hit send. 10 minutes later, my office door opened. I hadn't buzzed anyone in. Beatrice stood there. She had somehow bypassed Miller, probably by crying or making a scene until he felt too awkward to stop her. She looked frantic. Her hair was coming loose. You can't do this, she hissed, marching up to my desk. I am in a meeting, Beatrice, I said, not looking up from my spreadsheet. There is no one here. I am meeting with the numbers, which are very ugly for you. She slammed her hands on my desk. I own the house. It's mine. Yes, I said, finally looking at her. You own a very expensive pile of bricks, and I own the bank that holds the loan on those bricks. So here is the reality, Beatrice. You have two choices. Beatrice stared at me, her chest heaving. What choices? Choice 1, I said, leaning back in my leather chair. You keep the house. You use your stipend to pay what you can. You fire the staff. You shut down the pool. You let the gardens die. You live in one room of that massive mansion, heating it with space heaters because you can't afford the oil bill. And in 6 months, when you default on the mortgage payments, I foreclose. I take the house back, and you leave with nothing but your clothes. Beatrice flinched. She knew I wasn't bluffing. She had seen me do this to rival shipping companies. That's cruel, she whispered. That's business, I countered. Choice two. I slid a folder across the desk. I have had legal draw up a purchase agreement. The trust will buy Highgrove and the Hamptons house from you. We will pay fair market value minus the outstanding mortgage debt. It will leave you with a lump sum of roughly $2 million. Combined with your stipend, you can buy a very nice condo in the city, you can travel, you can live a comfortable upper middle class life. 2 million? Beatrice scoffed. The estate is worth 20? The estate is appraised at 20, I corrected. But the debt is 15, and the market is soft. 2 million is generous. It's a clean break, Beatrice. You get cash. I get the legacy assets back under company control where they belong. She picked up the contract. Her hands were shaking. She looked at the paper, then at me. You planned this, she accused. You wanted this all along. I wanted a sister, I said softly. I wanted to grieve our parents together. But you locked me out, Beatrice. You started a war because you thought I was weak. You thought because I was quiet, I was soft. You forgot who has been keeping the lights on for the last 30 years. She looked down at the contract. She knew she was beaten. She couldn't afford the house for a week, let alone a lifetime. She was a woman who had never paid a bill, suddenly holding the invoice for an empire. If I sign, she said, her voice small, can I keep the furniture? You can keep the furniture in your bedroom, I said. The rest stays. It's part of the historic designation. She bit her lip. She looked at the pen. Then, with a jagged, angry motion, she signed her name. I hate you, she said, throwing the pen down. I know, I said. But I'm the only reason you're not going to be homeless, so you're welcome. She stormed out. I watched her go. I felt a tremendous weight lift off my shoulders. I picked up the contract. Highgrove was mine. Not because I inherited it, but because I bought it. I had earned it twice over. 2 years have passed since that day. I am sitting on the terrace of Highgrove Estate. It is Sunday morning. The sound is calm, the water reflecting the pale gray of the sky. The house is quiet. I didn't turn the library into a wellness studio. I kept it exactly as it was, though I did finally replace the drapes. I run the company from here on Mondays and Fridays. The stock is up another 12%. I have a new security team. I have a new life. Beatrice lives in a condo in Tribeca. We speak on holidays. It is polite, distant, and brief. She spends her stipend on yoga retreats and investment opportunities that I politely decline to fund. She is still Beatrice, chasing the next shiny thing, but she is no longer my burden. She has her walls and I have mine. I sip my coffee, black, no sugar, and think about my parents. For a long time I was angry. I thought their will was a game of final manipulation. But as I sit here surrounded by the empire they built and I saved, I realize they were smarter than I gave them credit for. They didn't choose between us. They simply held up a mirror. They gave Beatrice what she wanted, the appearance of wealth. They gave me what I needed, the control to protect it. They knew that if they gave me the house, Beatrice would have spent her life suing me for more money. By giving it to her, they forced her to realize she couldn't handle it. They forced her to sell it to me. It was a cruel lesson, but a necessary one. They knew I was the only one strong enough to be the villain in Beatrice's story, so that I could be the hero in the company's story. I put down my coffee cup. The sun is breaking through the clouds. I have a board meeting tomorrow. I have a merger to review. I have a life that is entirely, undeniably my own. The locks on the doors are new, and I am the only one with the key. This story is about more than just money or inheritance. It's about the difference between being given value and creating value. Catherine spent her life building while Beatrice spent hers consuming. In the end, the boring traits of discipline and responsibility were the only things that could save the family legacy. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the parents' will was genius or cruel? Did they set Beatrice up to fail on purpose? If you were Catherine, would you have bought the house back or let Beatrice face foreclosure on her own? Have you ever been the responsible one in your family while someone else got the glory? How did you handle it? Please like and subscribe for more stories about family secrets and justice served.